And when I sent the case to Dr. Mueller, he goes, oh, I know hypercat. And I went, oh, that's never a good thing. So Jodie, I'm going to give this to you, and you're going to tell us hypercat story.
Kelsey.
Yes, poor hypercat. I believe he's a cat with 9 lives. Well, we might have more than that. That's the way it goes. But this is a horse I've grown raised my whole life, been horse crazy. And this was a horse that belonged to a client of mine that I trained for. And I saw his papers when he was just a yearling. And I'm like, I want that horse. I didn't see him, I just saw his papers. I'm like, I've got to have that horse. Well, he was just a yearling then. He swapped hands some. But actually ended up in the hands of another client of mine. And they got him as a late 2-year-old. And he got a few issues, and I'm like, I'm a horse trainer, not a horse breaker. This nigger's got to go somewhere. But that's nothing. So he went to Ed Daddy's for 60 or 90 days. He had some issues. Ed didn't even get on him for the first 30 days. He's like, yeah, he's got some trust issues. So we got him back. The people that owned him, their circumstances had changed, and they sent him to another trainer. So it was late in his 3-year-old year when I got him back, and he was a mess. He was looking at a set of barrels and start sweating and trembling and going backwards. He was just terrible. So we started working slowly, bringing him back. Now we were getting ready to run 5-year-old maturities on him. His 4-year-old year, getting ready, and I decided I was going to make a trip to Kentucky with him to get him used to being hauled a long ways and being stalled over a weekend and moved around. So we went to Kentucky, everything went well, came back on Monday, turned him out in the pasture, came in and fed him at night, and he came in and he just nibbled at his feed and then went and drank a bunch of water. I thought, that's odd. You can see the boy likes to eat. He nibbled this and then. So he goes, nibbles at his feed again, and goes back to the water bucket. I thought, that's just really odd. So I pulled the feed out of the stall, took his temperature, looked him over. Oh, he looked all right, and he was a little tired. So I said, well, I'm going to leave him in the stall overnight, give him a little bit of alfalfa. And I'll check, when I get up in the morning and he before work, I'll check on him. Well, I wasn't at all prepared what I was going to find in the morning. When I walked in the barn, it looked like he had fought a war. He had ripped the water bucket down off the stall. There were shavings everywhere. He was sitting in the middle of this stall, just sprawled out with his head hanging down, and just barely moved his eyes and looked at me like, oh my God. And I work at the vet school at UGA, but in the pharmacy, so I know just enough to be dangerous. But I knew it wasn't good. So I hurried up, fed the other horses, threw them on the trailer and started bawling. And poor people at the vet school, they're used to me calling them, they're crying all the time with my emergencies. So I call them, they're crying, tell them what I've got, bring him in. And when I get there, when I get him off the trailer, like he's so weak, he's dragging his feet. You can see his toes on the concrete, he's so weak. And I thought it looked like bloody diarrhea in the trailer. Dr. Eggleston met me in the breezeway crying with him. He said, oh, stop, turn around, let's get him to isolation. We got him over to isolation. Dr. Hart and her team and all the technician stuff came over and started working on him. And I never thought to look. When they curled his lip up, his gums were the darkest purple you've ever seen. It looked like you'd hit your thumb with a hammer or something, like just this blood red purple on his gums. He was so dehydrated and so weak. They were trying to get catheters in him to get him rehydrated. They couldn't hardly find his veins. He was so dehydrated. And Dr. Hartson would explain more about what his blood work and everything meant, but his blood work was just off the charts with what's going on. He had colitis. And he was basically shedding the lining of his intestines. And that's where the bloody diarrhea was coming from. And so his body was, all these toxins were getting into his system, and that's why his gums were purple. The bloody diarrhea, his body was dumping protein in and shedding it out through his colon. He was just a disaster. I started rehydrating him. When I got the catheters in, I thought, well, he looks pretty good. They came to me the next day, and they said, he's got subcutaneous emphysema. I went, huh? Because he's got air under his skin. When you would touch him in his flank area, it would crunch. And they said that something was wrong and that he was releasing air and it was getting under his skin. And they said, really the only 2 options we've got is the infection is going systemic or he's got a tear in his colon. Neither of which are good options. And they said, we can't find a tear palpating, but that doesn't mean there's not one. We've got them on every antibiotic under the sun. And so if the Gruber, with their faculty member, Dr. Williams, pulled me up the pharmacy, sat me down to tell me all this. And I'm just crying. I'm sitting there thinking, he looks so much better than me. When you're getting hydrated, what do you mean? So I'm bawling. I'm like, I can't tell you guys, I can't say to put him down. And they told me, they said, well, we don't often, we don't tell people whether or not they should put their horses down in circumstances like this. You don't know what a horse can pull through. He might be able to pull through it, but he's going to founder again. And I'm just bawling. I can't give up on him. I'm like, can we just take it a day at a time? And Dr. Hart's like, we don't even like taking it an hour at a time. I'm like, I don't care. I just can't give up. So we kept on. We did plasma transfusions on him. There was one more antibiotic that was on back order that we had a spare case of in the pharmacy that we were holding for emergency. And I asked my school, is there any way we can use that other antibiotic? We had to get permission from head, and at the time it was Dr. Mueller. So they went to Dr. Mueller and said, can we have permission to use this antibiotic? And he said, well, if there's ever a case that's going to need it, this would be it. So they started on the other antibiotic. He was on the plasma transfusion, on everything under the sun, and he just hung in there day by day. And I think Dr. Hart about lived in solid isolation. And they were constantly checking his feet to see if he was going to founder, and hour by hour, day by day, he pulled through. And about 2 weeks later, he got to leave isolation and had founder. He still had to spend about a week in the hospital. He had to go to, with colitis, there's a few things that can cause it, a couple of which are very contagious, salmonella or clostridium. And so when a horse has colitis, you have to be very careful to keep them isolated away from the horses so other horses don't catch it. So he had to test negative for salmonella clostridium before he could get out of isolation, but he still wasn't well enough to come home. So they moved him to a low traffic area of the hospital. He got to get stalled next to a camel, which he loved. But he made it through. He was there about another week, and he came home. When we walked him out in the trailer, Dr. Hart, she had tears in her eyes, and I'm like, what? She said, I just didn't think I was going to see him walk out here. She said, there's no way he should be walking out here. She said, I told the technicians to not be surprised if they walk by and find him dead and stuff. I was like, oh, I'm glad you didn't tell me. Lie to me, please. So luckily she didn't tell me that at the time. I knew it was grave, but I don't think I understood the true gravity of his case until we were walking out of the trailer. She told me that. So if you guys want a card full, try to explain some stuff. I know I've grown up around horses my whole life, and this was my first experience with colitis. And we've since lost another pony to it. That's really practical. But she'll explain to you guys some of the seriousness of colitis and what to look for and some of the miracles from his faith.
Jodie did a pretty good job. Can y'all hear me?
How about that?
Jodie did a very good job explaining hypercats are a form of colitis. Colitis is a really common thing that we see, and basically it's just inflammation or infection in the intestinal tract. It can present in a number of different ways. The kind of best case scenario is a horse that's a little bit hunky off its feet, maybe has a little bit of diarrhea and a fever, and then turns around and does just fine. Horses can have more severe forms where they have more severe diarrhea, need a lot of IV fluids, things like that. Or they can have even a very, what we call paracute form, where they don't even have time to have diarrhea or show that they're sick, they're just found dead. I have to say, hypercat was one of the first cases I saw when I started at UGA 6 years ago, and he still, after 6 years, is the sickest horse I've ever treated that actually went home. So that shows you where he is on the gamut of colitis. Yeah, and you know how handsome you are, don't you? In his case, we never identified the actual cause of colitis. We still suspect it was Clostridium. But in a lot of the cases of colitis that we see, we don't find the initial cause. The biggest complication is if the horse survives the initial bout of colitis, is the dreaded laminitis or founder. And to this day, I don't know how hypercat made it through without having that complication, but we're very happy that he did, because look at all those cool things you've been doing since then. So I don't know if y'all have any questions about colitis or about hypercat's case in general, but he certainly is an